Oh, Lord. I have just been at Unity Village where I presented the program on the lay ministry to, I would say about 250 ministers out there. And I am continually impressed with, and I think the Unity movement in general is continually impressed with how creative this ministry is and how remarkable it is. And there is a pure example of the kind of creativity that comes from this community, and we're all a part of it. It isn't only me. It's all of us. And you know, we're zany critters here in Walnut Creek, and I think we all found each other right here in this building. And if there is no other reason for our being here together, if it just gives us license to continue to be a little bit crazy, you know, crazy is sometimes serious and sometimes not serious, and just with ourselves, well, I'm probably making too much of it, but I'm just tickled. And thanks for your response to this wonderful gift of creativity which is sitting here. Mark, don't record this part, please, and then edit it out. I brought a stone with me this morning. It's a one I picked up outside, and it has to do with my lesson, which is called The Game of Accusation. And I want to share with you a passage from the Bible that has to do with accusation. It's one of the better ones, and if I can read it, here we go again. I will do so. It comes from the book of John. It's chapter 8, the first few verses of that chapter. And what takes place here has to do with Jesus and his experiencing the role of accusation in his life and in the life of somebody else. So listen carefully for a moment. The scribes and Pharisees brought to Jesus a woman who had been caught in adultery, and they placed her in the middle of them, and they said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone her." According to the old law, Moses commanded us to stone her. Those are very important words. What do you say about her? What should we do? Now you know that they're out to trick him. They're out to catch him in the old law. They want to see if he'll follow through with the 10 Commandments. That's a very important point, which has to do with like a split in our history universally of what happened when Jesus of Nazareth was born and brought to us a whole new set of ways to relate to life. There was an old law, the 10 Commandments. Here he's having thrust in front of him, how are you going to treat this situation? Will you abide by the old law? Or do you have something new to say about this? And God help you if you have something new to say about this, because that's going to give us license to destroy you. Take it all in. Put it in your own life right this minute. And think about when you're given the opportunity to accuse, whether you abide by the old law, or whether you are caught within yourself with a dynamic move into another law, and what that will mean to you if you live by the new law, which might mean that you, in turn, might lose a portion of yourself. And indeed you will. Pretty high risk. So Jesus, realizing that they were testing him and that they might have some charge to bring against him, this is what he did. He bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground.
Sounds like Mario.
Why don't you just go see what he wants? Would you do that, Pat, or he? Look at me, he. We'll just take time for him to write in the ground, all right? Let's get into the mood of the thing. It also gives me a chance to blink so I can see it again. And after he had written in the ground, as they continued to ask him, he stood up and said to them, "Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her." And once more he bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. When they heard his words, they went away one by one, beginning with the eldest. And Jesus was left alone with a woman standing before him. Jesus then looked up at her and said, "Woman, where are your accusers? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, Lord." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." All right? Maybe some of you have never even heard the passage. I heard an interesting comment from somebody who's a minister in Alabama, and I said, "Boy, it must be difficult teaching down the Bible Belt." And he said, "You know, there's really a gift to it. At least down the Bible Belt, they know their Bible, and they can really appreciate unity and unity's new interpretation of the Bible. Out on the West Coast, they've never even read the Bible, so they don't even know." Interesting, huh? I'd like to take care of this one with just two simple views. One is to look at the accuser, and one is to look at the accused. And before I begin taking a look at the accuser, I would like to make an observation that may be very strange to a lot of you who are doing intense work in the Course in Miracles. There is a real attempt, not only in the Course in Miracles, but in Christianity in general and in unity specifically, to say to people, don't judge. Haven't you heard that? Haven't you heard that?
Yes.
And as a part of hearing that, isn't there sometimes a guilt within you? And I hear you speak it sometimes. When I hear you judging, you say, "Oh, well, now I shouldn't be judging, but." I'd like to give another view toward it. I'd like you to know that I have absolutely no trouble with judging, and I'm a minister. I've read all those good books, and I've really worked with the issue of judgment. I really sincerely believe, and you can all leave the church if you'd like, that you were given judgment for some blessed reason under the sun, and that God gave it to you. And that judgment has a role in your life, and that you couldn't survive without it. In fact, judgment is an instinctual part of your survival heritage, and God wants you to have it. And I talked to God last night. If you didn't have judgment, none of you here could have raised your children. If you didn't have judgment, none of you could have ever left your parents. If you didn't have judgment, you wouldn't know how to make wise business decisions. It takes judgment to tell a child when to do this and when not to do that. It takes judgment in order to run this operation here. It takes judgment to know how to build a new building, what steps to take, and whom to contact. Now, a lot of us have tried to get around judgment. We said, well, that's discrimination. And we go through all this finagling with our mind, which really bothers me, because frankly, I don't want us to all be used up in finagling with our minds with whether it's judgment or discrimination or discernment or righteous judgment and all those things. The first step I think we have to make is to understand that we were all given judgment for some reason, and that the activity of that function of judgment serves somehow your being, your process, your evolution. And I don't dare say, do you agree? Because I think a lot of you have been pushed into a guilt bracket because you do judge, and you may not be ready this morning to step out of that and take a new look at judgment. I believe in God, and I believe God gives us all, and that all parts play a role. Well, if I'm saying all of this, then what's going on here? Well, there's a request that's made, and the request is made by the people who bring this adulterous, terrible woman before Jesus. And they say, shall we live by the old law, or do you have something else to offer? But they're not really being very nice about it. Now let's take a look at the old law. And the reason they're not being very nice about it, incidentally, is because they're really out to trap, to catch. In you, in any situation when you are about ready to be the accuser, to be some kind of judge, you are dealing with an old law and a new law. How am I going to function? Am I going to function purely as human being, or is there a Christ way to handle this. And Christ doesn't mean the personality. Christ means, is there a higher universal law that has been established amongst mankind that can now be brought through me to be delivered in this situation? Let's take a look at how the old law functions. And you know, they used to wonder if I was going to be the first woman baseball pitcher for the Boston Red Sox. They did. So I've got a good arm, and I'm not going to let this go. But I'd like you to just see something about maybe why the analogy to a stone is used. Just watch this. Do you feel that? I don't think the issue is the stone. And let's just let the stone be the statement that's being said from the mouth. Let the stone be the judgment. But let's take a look at what happens when we take a stone and we use it and we send it on a projectile. We do this. We get something else behind it, which is a kind of personal power, a kind of selfness behind the thing that gives an energy to it that causes the stone that's being given to have far more than the simplicity of the stone, the simplicity of the simple statement, black is black, white is white, the blouse you have on is purple, the way you behave is such and such a way. That's a stone. But when we get behind it, am I making sense to you? When we get behind it, then we get violent behind it. We get some kind of energy in there, some kind of feeling motion, which is what the throwing of the stone is. It's that issue alone which is the one that makes accusation difficult. There is no difficulty in being the judge. Where the difficulty comes is in the energy of the stone that is thrown, where one's hatred of one's own self is spewed upon another. I'm going to give you just a second right this minute because I may be going too fast, but just take a second right now to think of you the last time that you spewed all over somebody. To think of you maybe the last time that you didn't quite get the whole piece of that golf ball. The last time you hit your thumbnail with a hammer. Now what happens? A simple activity is happening here. Thumb gets hit with hammer. Bang. That's the stone. But what happens once thumb gets hit with hammer? Boom! One misses one's golf ball. You're out there, you have this sense of where you're going with the golf ball. You go to hit the thing and you follow through with this gorgeous stroke, and the ball goes pa-dunk, pa-dunk, pa-dunk off to the right. What happens? This tremendous energy moves through, which is the throwing of the stone, that causes the simplicity of this act that has nothing to do with personality, has everything to do with divine order, to move into a state of personality because where you become all involved. Does that make sense? Okay, so you're being the accuser, you're being accused. Something violent is happening here. You're ripping off the president, you're ripping off your boss, you're tying into your kid, you feel this venom. It isn't something simple that's occurring. It isn't a simple judgment of saying to your kid, you know, I wish you'd get in at 11 o'clock. But instead it's 1 o'clock in the morning and you are on a grand and glorious tirade. The stones are being thrown everywhere. Let's look at the Christ role in this. I'm talking about the accuser, okay? Let's look at the Christ role. This is really remarkable what happens here. And just see that this is the switch from the old law, where you would have the right to accuse, into another law. And here's the Christ. In the midst of the movement of the violent energy, and there's nothing wrong with the violent energy. Just remember, according to the old law, that's right. You have the right to cast the stone. But let's look at a slip in time where Jesus the Christ enters and he says, here's another way. And I'll bet he's saying, here's another way for humanity, here's another way for society, here's another way for the planet. And what he does is act out a very simple function that's being asked of each of you here in this room to engage in when you are attacked or when you are ready to attack. It doesn't matter. There's no difference between the accuser or the accused. You can switch them, throw them around. It doesn't matter. He says this. He acts it out. He just stoops down in the sand. And he writes. Now, I'm not suggesting to you that the next time you get accused or you're ready to accuse that you go out and find a sandbox and stoop down the sand and do some writing. It's not that stupid. It's not that insidious. It's not that absurd. But there is a major act happening here. There's a simple statement being made. When you're ready to accuse or when you are being accused, step inside for a moment. In fact, there's a wonderful statement that says, when you are ready to accuse, when you're ready to slam your kid against the wall because they've blown up the car or they've taken drugs, when they made this promise that they wouldn't do this, stop for a minute, close the doors on your mouth, your whole personal expression, get lost for 24 hours. You should laugh at that. Get lost for 24 hours. When somebody's done something heinous against you, when you are ready to decapitate somebody else, why don't you go away for 24 hours? There's a great message in that. That's a Christ message. Does that mean you're blocking your energy? You know what it says here in the Bible? It says that when he leaned down to the sand, it was as though he was not hearing. As though. It doesn't say he doesn't hear. Lack of action doesn't mean that you become impotent, that you're not moving. Lack of action can have something else to say, which is, this is a person of power. What's a person of power? It means that when you ring their bell, they don't ring it right back. They don't answer the phone. They just take a breath, and they go inside, and they listen. They listen. What are we listening for? We are listening for a deeper message than the old law. The first instinctual message is to pick up the stone and heave it. It's not natural to just take the stone and receive it for a minute and sit with it for a minute and have the dignity and the wisdom and the ego strength to say, I don't have to respond here. I'm not going to get something back necessarily if I rant and rave. What's going to be accomplished? All those thoughts. Listen. It takes courage. I was called this morning at 6 o'clock in the morning to be berated at. I didn't berate, folks. I didn't heave my stones. I listened and I waited. And then I had something to say. It was not accusation. Now let's look at what the next phrase of the Bible says. It says that Jesus lifted himself up. And he said these words, he that is without sin cast the first stone. Now this is marvelous. Notice that he doesn't say, don't cast the stone. That's what we've done with it in our Christian terminology, as if almost to protect each other, but about telling the truth to each other, and I hate it, I hate it, I hate it. The Christian living, if you want to call it Christian, I mind Christian, because I think what we really need to teach is the spiritual way of living, which is universal, is not to deny the truth from each other, not to take away telling the truth or giving out judgments or saying this is the way life is, this is what I see, this is what I experience. It's not a lying mechanism, it's not a denying mechanism. All that's being said here is, he that is without sin, let him then cast the stone. You have the right to give the stone when you are pure in heart, when you don't have any violence inside of you, when you don't have any personal issue to take care of on the field of battle. Then you may go out and take your things and deliver them. Did you hear that? If I'm so excited about this, you should get equally excited. Don't you know that's what I require? He who is without sin, let him cast the first stone. You have the right to offer it. But just be sure you're without sin. And what's it mean to be without sin? It's saying a simple thing. Get yourself clear first. Get yourself clear first. That's the law. That is a universal law. Don't get anybody else out there clear first. We must practice it and practice it and practice it, and we all must practice it. There's a wonderful story that I just heard recently It so says it. Don't ever forget it, about this young boy who came in to his father and he said to his father, God, Daddy, let's go out and do something. Come on, let's go play. Let's have a good time. And the father was reading the newspaper. The father didn't want to go out and have a good time. He really wanted to finish reading the newspaper. So he went and he took out some page of advertisement that had a picture of the world on it, and he tore out that half of the paper, and he gave it to the son. He said, look, son, why don't you go upstairs and put together this picture of the world. When you're all finished, come on down and we'll go out and play. So he tore the picture of the world up into a million pieces. So the little boy went upstairs, and the father thought for sure he'd lost the kid for 2 hours. Well, within 15 minutes the kid reappeared. And he had for him this picture of the world all bound together with tape and glue and everything. And the father looked at him and he said, my God, son, how did you ever do that so fast? And the boy said, well, turn it over, Daddy. And when he turned it over, on the back was a man. And the boy said, all I had to do was put the man together, and that was much easier, and then the world all fit. Such clear teachings, you know. You can deliver the stone when you're pure in heart. And you know that, don't you know that? Don't you know when you're coming, do you? Huh? Don't you know when you're involved and when you're not involved, when you're out of the way? That's all that's being asked for. Do the inner work until you're out of the way. There's an ancient statement. It comes from about Abraham Lincoln. I've always loved it. I'm going to just switch it a little bit this morning. It's the same thing about, it goes something like this. Fear knocked at the door. Faith answered. Nobody was there. What if we said it this way? Accusation knocked at the door. I saw myself and nobody was there. That's all that's being asked for. Then you can walk through the door and deliver your message. This is not denying you the right to say, I feel, I want, I need, I see. But it's requiring that first you get you out of the way before you deliver your message, and then bring your stone. And do it. You know what? I have waited years to deliver my message. Years. Shut my mouth and waited till I got clear. I've waited years. And I've done the inner work till I got out of the way. And what about the accused in this picture? Notice that once again, before Jesus is ready to deal with the accused, he stoops in the sand. I love that image, stooping in the sand. Why do you think that we always have the Buddhas writing in the sand? Why does Jesus stoop in the sand? There's something that's being said here. It's saying you must go within to do the inner work before you can come out into the world. That doesn't mean that you're always in. It means that life is a process of going in, coming out, going in, coming out. And it's not having the fear of the rightness of going in. So let's take a look at the accused. Now switch parts here, all right? Now you've become the accused. You've just been landed on. Somebody doesn't know this message. Somebody came up with all their vile and laid it right on you. That's the adulterous woman. I want to make a very poignant statement this morning. Accusation from another person is very definitely their thing. Got it? You know that. I think you all know that pretty well. Accusation from another person is very clearly within them. However, I've watched a whole bunch of us run around the earth picking up this line. It's their problem. Haven't you heard that said? You know, so we all started practicing this thing. We got so clear and we walked around saying, well, that's their problem. And then we've even written books that say, you're not the target. So we've all carried that one around. We have this big sign, I'm not the target. It's their problem. I don't like that one either. I don't like it at all. I didn't like it when I first heard it. I didn't know what was rotten about it. But what I see in it is a protectionist system. So we're using our spirituality again to avoid stuff. And I'll tell you what, I'll tell you when it isn't their problem. I'll tell you when you are the target, because sometimes you ought to be the target. What's that great sign? If you feel paranoid, it's because they are out to get you. You know, folks, sometimes I am off base. And if I keep using that sign, I'm not the target, it's your problem, I sure can avoid life and growth. That stinks. So I'll tell you when you are the target, and I'll tell you when it isn't just their problem, it's both. It's when, again, your heart is not pure. And when what they say to you or when what they dump on you causes you to feel terribly uncomfortable because there's a seed of truth in it and you need, again, to stoop in the sand and do some inner work. Pay attention. Alan Cohen said, I happened to sit in on a workshop of his this weekend. He said, if we could only, when we feel accused, see that the accuser is our Savior without a price tag. Our accuser is our Savior, but without a price tag. The purity of heart is the thing, you know. The inner clarity is the thing in this message. It's as if God has created something. I think He's created something wonderful, and I think we've tried to cancel a portion of it. And the something is that I think that you and I are all delivering laser beams. We talk about laser beam technology and Star Wars in the sky and all this stuff. But I've been teaching laser beam healing power here since I arrived. And my sense of laser beam theology, let's create a new word this morning, but laser beam theology would be that every one of us is putting out laser beams, all right? And we're moving. We are moving through space and time like this, sending it out. So I send out my laser beams to you. And you know where you need to be concerned is when one of my laser beams gets stuck in your territory and doesn't have a clear place to move through. That's all. And that's how I've lived my life, is when something hits me and it doesn't feel good in here, do I say that's their problem, that I'm not the target, they're the problem? No, I say, hey, here's some time for me to look in here so that I can do what? So that I can go inside and have my own inner ministry, my own inner consultation, until there is a clear spot through which now that laser beam may move. And now there's no resistance to you. Can you hear that? Can you see that? I think that's really the way it works. God intends for us to become clear. And so God will give us all kinds of opportunities to see where we're not clear. And is not being clear wrong? No, not clear is just not being clear. There doesn't have to be any guilt. So you stoop in the sand. And you go to work again until you're lifted up. The message closes with this: go and sin no more. I don't think that means that Jesus ever expected that adulterous woman to never sin again. I don't think He was stupid. I don't think He was even thought that He was that clever. I think what He was saying was, go and don't throw any more stones. How about that one? The sin here is throwing the stones. So what He's saying is, all you have to do, lady, is keep yourself clear, and then you won't have to throw stones. You see, what's happening in our world is that there's no room for venom anymore. Don't you know that? There's no room for Spitfires anymore. There are too many tinderboxes around. There are too many hostages being stolen out there. There's no room for people to fly off the handle anymore. And if it can't happen out there in the big world, it can't happen in your private home or your private heart anymore. We're only projections of, the world is a projection of us. You know that. You've known it and known it and known it in these groups. So Jesus is saying, we can't throw stones anymore in this new age we all talk about that's 2,000 years old. Did you know? I saw it so clearly when I was in Varanasi. Varanasi, which is the old city of Benares. probably the oldest city in the world, where a lot of us went to the Ganges River, and there had a chance to place our little light in the Ganges River, symbolic of how our light could never go out. And I had an amazing experience there. I had a temperature of 101 degrees, and when I came back from the river, I became aware that the fever was really getting me, so I went to bed. And I lay in a dark, hot room all afternoon and the early evening, and sometime around 7 o'clock that evening, I looked out and I watched some Indian boys playing soccer out on a field. And I don't know what it was about watching them play soccer, but somehow universality stuck in my in my system, and I realized they're playing soccer everywhere, and it doesn't make any difference where you are. And then something rose in my mind, and I wrote it in 2 letters to friends. I suppose you could say I wrote it in a feverish stupor, but it doesn't matter, because it is the truth, and it was, God help me if I ever make an attempt to declare an opinion or to share a bias again in my life, because frankly I don't know anything, and I never can. It's when I share an opinion that has my personal energy behind it that I throw a stone. And we can't throw stones anymore. The trip is inner. It's inner in the moment. It isn't just a monastic binge for 3 months in some foreign continent. It isn't just a year in an ashram practicing chanting. It's in the middle of a fight, stopping and going within. It's in the middle of an accusation, withdrawing the stone and taking the projectile energy off it. And it's practicing everywhere, all the time. And that's the game of accusation. Rudy?